Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today to another live talk from Live with Scientists. Today, we have Professor Warren Mansell, who's with us to talk about the use of perceptual control theory and in his research and to develop novel psychological interventions for mental health. So I'm going to bring him in and say hello. Hi, Nigel. How are you?
Hi, Christina.
I'm sorry about the confusion with the name. Sorry, Warren. How are you?
All right. Can you hear me properly?
I can.
Yeah, you've got a good audio. That's excellent.
So yeah, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for coming to talk to us about your research.
No worries. I'm looking forward to getting started.
So I'm just gonna, let you get on with it, and then we're gonna have after the talk, we're gonna have a little Q&A session. People who are watching live now, you can post your questions in the chat. We're gonna try and answer them when we finish the talk, and then just go ahead. Thank you so much, Warren.
No worries. Okay, this is a great opportunity. I put a few new slides together just to introduce myself to this new community of Live with Scientists. I've entitled my talk Mental Health from the Inside Out, and you'll see why when I introduce you to my work. I'm going to be talking to you about a number of different universal mental health interventions. By universal, I mean that they apply to people whether or not they have a mental health diagnosis at all levels, from mild to moderate to more serious. And for an intervention to be universal, it needs to be based on a universal theory, a theory of psychological functioning, a theory of how people function. And I'll be introducing to you perceptual control, which is actually that kind of theory. The interventions that I now use are method of levels, which is a therapy that was developed several decades ago by Timothy Carey from early work by Bill Powers, who developed perceptual control theory. Method of levels is a very straightforward therapy in some ways. It's about curiously listening to the person who's talking about a problem and trying to help them keep their awareness on that issue so that a process called reorganization starts to help them resolve the problem itself. Method of levels is actually inspiration for Milo, which is a smartphone app. It's a way of typing in about a problem that's worrying you or preoccupying you. And Milo uses a database and its own algorithms to ask questions that keep person focused on that problem, to help continue exploring it in depth and detail to get to a new perspective on it. 4Ds of dealing with distress is a stress management program that's very different from the last two because we provide it in a one-off session that's online to up to 300 people interactively. And it really captures everything from the kind of discovery-oriented way that Method of Levels works, right through to everyday ways that people try and distract themselves or manage their difficulties with all kinds of activities. And then there's a Take Control course. And the Take Control course is a 6-week-long group course. It's not like other group therapy because there's no need for self-disclosure. But during the course, people learn to apply PCT, perceptual control theory, to their own lives in a very straightforward way, talking about what you can control in your life and what you can't, and where trying to control different things gets in the way of each other, helping people to manage their lives in new ways and to learn the difference between short-term and long-term ways of dealing with stress and anxiety. So that's a real overview of these interventions. But I just wanted to talk to you about where this started. And I guess it started for me in quite a different place. It started for me with nature. my interest in psychology actually started with my interest in biology and natural history and animal life, as you can see from some of these early pictures of me engaging with nature. And my first publication there, I think I was about 10 at the time when I put together a little handbook on bird life. So I'd always been fascinated in biology. And it just so happens that I lived in a place called Biggin Hill, which is down the road from Down House, which is where Charles Darwin used to live. So not only was I fascinated by nature, watching David Attenborough documentaries, life on Earth introduced me to evolution and Darwin and the way that he did science. And of course, what Darwin was faced with was this kind of whole diverse categories of different species, and he set himself the goal of trying to explain how they evolved, how they changed over time. And that theory, the theory of evolution via natural selection, was the quite controversial theory at the time that Darwin proposed, but is now the essence of how we still understand the way that animals and plants on this planet have adapted and evolved. And what I wanted to do when I eventually kind of went to university was to try and take this kind of view towards people and mental life and psychological difficulties. Surely if all these different categories that you see in nature, we can look beneath them and see some underlying principles, surely we can also look underneath the categories of all the things that we can get troubled by in life and see if there's some underlying principles. So just like looking at the range of animals and plants, we have the range of different challenges, different psychological difficulties that people can experience. Sorry about what the slides have done here, but they were typed out correctly when I finished with them. It's because I've uploaded them. So the question is there a core theory, is there a core principle that underpins all these different ways that we can experience distress? And I'm going to share with you one study that I carried out with a colleague actually over here in Perth about 5 or 6 years ago. And Pete was running a service where people were coming for psychological help with all kinds of different kinds of anxieties and panic and a range of different emotional problems. So on the surface of it, looking like they had very different presentations. And in the service, they were asking people to complete measures of all kinds of processes, all kinds of things that people might do to deal with their problems: worry, suppress their thoughts, hide their emotions, use drug or alcohol, avoid things, all kinds of different ways of dealing with emotional difficulties. And interestingly, nobody had actually looked at these questions to see if they were all different or whether they actually all fit together into one kind of cluster. And so I did a form of analysis called principal component analysis, and found that actually all these questions correlated with one another. When people scored highly on one of these, they tended to score high on the others as well. And it was what they all had in common that actually related to whether the person had anxiety and depression. And when you looked at how they were all different from one another, that really didn't relate to their distress. So that pointed to there being some core to what's going on when people are distressed. And that's the first step of developing a universal intervention. What's another step is to listen to people sharing their diverse experiences of mental health problems. And I was involved in many studies, interviewing people and asking people about their experiences. And there was a theme that was coming up again and again. It was a theme of losing control when someone is experiencing the mental health difficulty, feeling like their behavior is out of control, their emotions are out of control, their relationships were lost. And at the other hand, their recovery was about taking back control of their life again, or as one of these participants put it, I became the director of my own life. And so there's a real theme here in terms of loss of control and regaining of control. And while this work was coming through, I was looking for ways to try and explain this whole set of information, data that was emerging. And I came across a theory known as perceptual control theory. And I've got a website here for the organization that has got all the resources on this theory that you need. But I'm going to tell you a few things about the theory. One is that the theory was first published in 1960. It's an old theory. And the second is to tell you about the basics, the fundamentals of it. It's essentially a psychological form of homeostasis, of a closed loop of how control works. And it's summed up by the creator of the theory as behavior being the control of perception. What we see people do is people's ways to try and control their inputs, their sensory experiences. Okay, so when someone's balancing on a rope, on a tightrope walking, they are trying to keep still. They're trying to keep control of their balance, but to do it, they're changing their behavior all the time. They're adjusting and balancing. And there's a recent study, literally came out this year, that showed this dynamic change in action that's happening to keep something balanced. The idea is that that's the general rule across the whole of psychology, that the actions, the things we do, are just the ways in the moment that we're trying to get an experience. It's not necessarily that we plan our behaviors ahead. We actually just do what's going to give us the experience that we need. But we organize those experiences such that sometimes we might be trying to control something in a very short term, like whether we can juggle balls or get our porridge the right temperature. Other times we're trying to control something in the long term, like whether we come across in a good way to people, whether we're understood, whether we can be a helpful person. These are all other kinds of standards which we have a way of coding for in our heads, and our behaviors over time are ways that we try and meet those and keep them. And so if behavior is the control of perception, then learning is an inside-out process, because it's something that we're doing to try and maintain control and try and balance the control of one thing with the control of another. And so what this means for distress and mental health is that distress is when we lack our control over something important to us, and that's often because of conflict, which I'll explain. And we need to go through the process of regaining control by a process of learning called reorganization. But that form of learning and reorganization is an inside-out way of learning. It's a trial and error way of learning, just like Darwin's natural selection. So let me show you a very simple example of how conflict can come about. Conflict is most pronounced when people are trying to face their fears. They're afraid of something, like a spider. You get a lot of those out here in Australia. And at the same time, they want to face that thing they're afraid of. They might want to overcome their fear. They might want to go camping or be a strong person. But at the same time, they want to get away from that thing they're afraid of. So this variable of distance from the spider is in conflict. It's not being controlled, because the person has a goal to face their fears, but they have a goal to stay safe. And these two are actually conflicting with one another and pushing and pulling their distance from the thing that they're afraid of. And they feel that sense of uncertainty. So what do we need to do to be able to approach our things we fear in a way that works for us? And I've summed this up in a term, to be brave, but essentially it's about facing the fear and doing it anyway. At a higher level, we have a sense that I'm a kind of person that wants to run away from things, but I also need to face them. And when we get that higher level perspective, we can start to develop new ways of facing our fears or dealing with problems in general. And it's that high level perspective that we need people to get to and to start to change and modify and learn. And that's the reorganization process, with the idea that the longer we focus on our problems from that perspective, the greater chance we've got through trial and error to come to a solution, a way that allows us to regain control over that aspect of our lives. And there's the whole sort of diagram as a whole. So the classic kind of way of understanding a problem in PCT is something at the bottom, the symptoms, the things that are the product of the conflict at the middle level, some goal that is pulling us one way or the other. And then at the higher level, we need to find a way of resolving those conflicting goals. And that's led me very recently to generate a perspective on consciousness as a whole, which I won't go into detail now, but it builds very much on that work in perceptual control theory, describing what the role of consciousness is. The role is to help people learn new ways to control aspects in their lives. So they're building from the automatic things that they're automatic goals they have to ones that are a novel way of resolving and re-establishing control. And what that means is that we aren't just driven to stay safe and to meet some sort of basic thresholds of lack of pain and increased pleasure. We actually have another system which, even when all our other needs are met, just keeps on churning through, and our consciousness feeds that process. And that's what I'm calling here our instinctive curiosity, our tendency to want to keep on seeing novelty and seeing new ways to look at the world. And it's actually, interestingly, what some of the clients who have shared their accounts talk about as one of their driving forces for their recovery, looking at the world with this instinctive curiosity. Another concept related to this that I've described is what I call here the discovery mode. It's the way that we can get our minds into a curious perspective that allows us to look at our problems in a way that recognizes we can be in two minds about things, that notices that solutions might come in a trial and error way. So it's a way of managing our minds in a way that's constructive and continually generates new perspectives. And so we've done some research trying to capture this mode of awareness to see if it's as helpful as we think. But when we take an approach to mental health problems that's guided by perceptual control theory, it actually takes us to a new place in terms of how we deliver and provide them. If control is so important, then why not let clients schedule and plan their own appointments and come to as many as they need until they're better? If people are in control of when they face their fears, then let them decide when and how to face them. Give them the techniques, but give them the choice about how to face them in a way that works for them. When we're delivering stress management to people, don't say to people mindfulness works, but slow breathing doesn't. Don't pitch them against each other. Just realize that different people have different strategies that work for different types of problems. Equip them with those choices and allow them to make the decision for themselves. Help people to have a basic framework that we do in the 4Ds that helps people notice the difference between short-term control and long-term control, so that both have a place. Distraction has a place when you're a bit stressed, but there's also a place for, in the long term, starting to get to the root of what that problem is. And that sense of curiosity that we can achieve in method levels therapy, but you can even emulate in a chatbot, is an implication of this. And there's an implication of how we study and look at change, because change is going to happen at different times for different people because of this reorganization process. And so, as I've said before, this leads us to revisit and see how you can get these different types of intervention based on the same theory that all link in together if people want to use more than one. Within Milo, for example, we've shown that that capacity to have a high level awareness on your goals is what mediates the effects of the intervention in resolving your problems. So you might expect Milo to work, but it's only actually going to work through the mediation of this high level awareness. And in a very recent trial that we've just done, in a small group of people, we've shown this general decrease in problem distress accompanied by an increase in this type of discovery mindset. So that's really what I wanted to say. I wanted to kind of explain to you why I think we should all be doing mental health interventions that are universal. We should all be doing interventions that are scalable, because we have a world problem here. And we should all be using the tools of science and theory and engagement with nature to reach that end. The way that I do it is through the theory of perceptual control theory. And it's one that's led to a very fruitful way of providing these kinds of interventions. And that's everything. Thank you for listening.
Wow, thank you so much. I have so many questions, and I don't know. I mean, there are a few questions as well. Or
yeah, I guess I should answer the ones that people put up there. I think.
I don't know if but I will start. If anybody in our chat would like to pop in the questions, that would be great. But I will start because I think it. As you were talking about it and explaining the approach, I was getting really excited. And I think as someone who has gone through different therapeutic approaches, it sounds really novel and it sounds really interesting. So I don't know whether you've already had feedback from your clients. How does this compare to other approaches out there? Have you heard any kind of like specific differences?
Yeah, we've done lots of research on that. More of that research has been on method of levels itself, but they all share these elements in common. People just really like the fact that they're in charge of the process and it's convenient to them, and that they're being listened to, and that the therapist is maintaining that listening throughout the whole process. And many people in other therapies find that therapists can end up giving them advice, sharing their points of view, breaking that kind of stream of consciousness. Whereas the point of method levels is that the person with the problem describes it, and we're just scaffolding that way that they can try and understand it better. And so that control at all different kinds of levels is something that people really value. In terms of colleagues, they really value the fact that this is universal. They don't have to learn a different approach for lots of different problems and conditions, because it's based on some really intuitive principles. Yeah.
Sorry, no, I didn't mean to interrupt, but it's just there's so much kind of like into it, and I think that's another thing, because I feel like a lot of other approaches, or at least the ones that I've come across, seem to be really useful for some people, or for certain types of disorders or certain types of issues, but not so much for others. And this seems to be very easy. Well, I mean, I use easy in the very loose sense of the word, but it seems to be very flexible in the sense that you can adapt to a literally individual level. And that seems really, is that the case? I mean,
yeah. When you're doing method levels, you're literally adapting to the person as they're talking, so that you keep up and you keep your questions pertinent to what current goal, current issues they're describing to you, and the client can change that focus as and when they want. It's not down to what particular diagnosis they've got or what way you understood the problem together the previous week. It's about how you're going to form that understanding now, and one that's really going to make a difference in the here and now. But there has been this period, and it was only really between the 1980s and the last 10 years that the sort of slicing up of psychological interventions happened. From the dawn of psychotherapy, psychoanalysis, person-centered therapy, and cognitive therapy, which was rational therapy in the 50s, they were all they were not provided in a diagnostic way. It was only with the advent of the diagnostic manuals in the 70s and 80s that then psychologists decided to go along with that and piecemeal up their models. But the evidence that, I mean, no one's ever provided one model for one disorder and see whether it helps another one. They just go forth and test them separately. But actually, when you look at the underlying mechanisms, a lot of the time you find that it's the same mechanism which is affecting change across the different categories. But even people like Aaron Beck, who developed cognitive therapy, would agree with this, and he would call it decentering. But that hasn't stopped this kind of duplication of models, because that's just the narrative and the terminology and the world that we live in at the moment, or at least have done for the last few decades.
Yeah. And the other thing that I thought was really interesting is the use of technology, and because that also has been happening. And obviously we had a whole pandemic, and a lot of people had to then get used to doing maybe therapy online or using online tools to access the therapy, which previously was maybe done predominantly face-to-face. And because you mentioned the use of Milo, and is this particular approach more suited to using technology as well, like going forward?
I would say it is, for a number of reasons. One is that we expect that the changes that happen are going to happen within the person with the problem. And even when we meet someone face to face for method of levels therapy, we are not investing time in forming a relationship or even trying to understand the problem ourselves. That will emerge from the conversation, but the goal isn't that. The goal is to use our attention and our listening skills to try and help the client themselves form the best possible understanding that they can of the problem. And it doesn't really matter whether I understand it anywhere near as well. It's important that they do. And what you find actually then is that something like Milo with technology has got a much easier job to do, because all it has to do is find some things to ask about. Whereas most of technology and AI has gone in a completely the opposite direction, trying to artificially kind of represent knowledge in these massive kind of big data houses, and then when you ask it something, it just gives you a load of knowledge, in a way that's really unpleasant if you want to be a client talking to these AI systems.
Yes.
And whereas Milo, the point of Milo is that it brings the wisdom out from within the person who's using it, and doesn't even try to be clever in its own right. It's got no intelligence.
Exactly. It's
so
also
Milo's like the opposite of ChatGPT, basically.
Yes. Yeah, that's so exciting. Oh, so we finally have some questions from our audience. Thank you so much, everyone. And so Matthias says, what helps people to get into a discovery mode of conscious awareness?
That's interesting. I think feeling safe and comfortable and having your other needs met, essentially. So once our other kind of basic needs are met and we feel safe enough and we're not really hungry and we're not distracted by other things that are just uncomfortable, the idea is actually our minds do sort of gravitate towards this naturally curious, exploring way of being. Now, whether we can do that in a conversation, I think there's certain, abilities that we have as we develop, that allow us as adults to kind of talk and imagine things while we're talking. It's quite a challenging thing, and I think sometimes that ability isn't as well formed at certain ages, for example. But I would say the basics of it are having your needs met and being in that curious and sometimes playful and sometimes courageous, or state of mind that's going to allow you to at least put into words some of the feelings that you might not have done in another situation, in another context. And obviously the basics of it being a secure private space when you meet a counsellor is part of what sets those conditions up.
Thank you for that. And then Karen Maloney says, "Hi Warren, I have recently been in a workplace mediation course and I found Method Apply reminded me of PCT. Have you applied PCT, conflict resolution and mediation?" I guess.
Yeah. I've written a paper on it with a colleague, Kent McClelland, who works in the kind of sociology space. But essentially in that paper, we say, the method of levels approach is going to be extremely powerful for conflict mediation, because it's built to deal with conflicts that are internal, but actually most conflicts with another person are internal conflicts as well. It's like, should I say this? I want to say it, but I'm going to upset them at the same time, for example. So yes, there's a paper, if you search for it, myself and Kent McClelland, where we've proposed it. We've not had the opportunity working with a mediator yet to actually put it into practice and evaluate it.
So maybe we can put some links on the description. I'll leave those links about the interesting literature or the description, the website that you shared with us before. But yeah, I think this is it feels almost as if I feel, obviously retrospectively, how is this not more widely used? Because it just sounds like almost like that, like you said, intuitive, and the curiosity, the natural curiosity. And I think a lot of the work that's normally done by people who are going through therapy is that sort of like searching within and trying problems. But it seems like sometimes you get to that stage where, well, what do I do now? And I think this approach seems to be dealing precisely with that issue of like almost hitting a wall, like, well, I don't know where does that come from? And I think just kind of working through it in a more natural way, almost in a more intuitive way. So this is
the idea,
extremely exciting. Thank you so much.
It's interesting. I was going to say, it's interesting. Some approaches think that people just need to be given the solution. Others think they already know the solution, they just need to find it. PCT is neither of those. You've got the building blocks to form the solution, but you're going to form the solution on the fly as you're talking about it, with the help of the listeners' questions.
Absolutely. So Karen has another message. It is interesting to engage with it again. It's been a while since I wrote my dissertation on the Warren supervision. So there you go. This is one of your students.
Oh, right. Lovely. Nice to hear from you.
So, yes.
But I think you're asking that question about why is it not everywhere? And, obviously we're doing our best to raise awareness of PCT, but it's been around for 60, 70 years. So it's an interesting question. But I think, and I've sometimes done training to groups of counsellors who are very used to more classic Rogerian approaches. And the interesting thing is when I explain the theory and then they see method of levels, because the theory is very technical, it's drawn from control engineering, but the conclusions of the theory is that if the person needs to be in control of this process, they need to be held and listened to and explore. So you have this contrast between this sort of technical nuts and bolts kind of theory and this extremely humane form of therapy. And I think some people find that hard because they're either drawn into technical work or they're drawn into more qualitative interpersonal work. And PCT just pushes those two together and says, look, we have to to appreciate both.
Absolutely. And I think that seems like the right approach. But yes, it is interesting that it's taking so long to kind of make it more, to raise awareness. And I mean, one more thing I think that I was thinking when you were talking, obviously, about mediation and conflict with others is about conflict within, and also communication, because communication, it's always about conflict within as well. I think a lot of the things that we do, certain people might have this more than others, but the interpretation of what you get from the outside always plays a role in your response to it. So it seems like this is kind of like the more natural way of dealing with like trying to work out your working with your experiences and your issues.
Well,
but also
the other thing is that communication is a form of control, and I think often communication and control are separated, but communication is a form of control. And when you realize that, you realize how you need to attend to your method of communication to be sensitive to people's needs. So another applied element of perceptual control theory is called empowered conversations, and it's a way of helping carers of people living with dementia to have conversations with the person with dementia that are fulfilling for the person with dementia by giving them more control over how the conversation goes. And those carers are sort of in those courses shown and demonstrated how language can be so controlling, and helping them to refine their use of language to make it simpler, more immediate, more present, in order to restore that balance of control in the relationship.
That's really interesting. I had never really thought about it in that way, and I think it just permeates every angle, isn't it? I was just thinking about, even how you talk to certain groups of people, talking to children. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think language is a form of control. So I will definitely will share some links. I don't think we have any more comments at the moment. But definitely, if anybody else, when they watch and rewatch this talk, I'm hoping they have more questions. We can just kind of like put a link to Warren's work, and I'm looking forward to kind of following up on the research and to learn a little bit more about it. I think. Oh, sorry, Karen has another question or another message. Think that is why it resonates so strongly with me, having studied both engineering and psychology, and as you say, it provides a natural explanation for human behavior. And I think that goes back to your the origins, like you came through the natural world and interest into the natural world, and I think it is, it's a holistic approach. It's very it's much more. So I think we're kind of getting close to the end of the talk, but thank you so much to Professor Warren Mansell for the interesting talk and for sharing with us the research and insights. Thank you for participating in our Live with Scientists project. And we're going to do a re-streaming of this talk later today, but it will remain in our website as well. Thank you so much, and we'll follow up on the work. Thank you, Warren.
All right, thank you. You're welcome.
Bye.